Hello, so I'm really happy today to be having a conversation with Paula Derry, who lives in Baltimore in America. And she's a shiatsu practitioner like me. And she spent a lot of her career and of her life researching the menopause. She graduated from the Ohashi Institute in 2008, but she became interested in shiatsu much earlier on in her life, and she's going to be telling us more about this. But she also has a PhD in clinical and social psychology from Yale University. And I brought her here today. I'm having this conversation because I really value her background in clinical and social psychology. And also she's spent a lot of her working life engaged in different types of research. So I'll let her talk more about how she's got into her work on the menopause and hand over to her now.
Okay.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's lovely to see you and to have the opportunity to talk. So a little bit more about my background. Much earlier in my life, I interrupted my graduate training to take a time out and move to Berkeley, California, where I had my first exposure to bodywork, and also was fortunate that I wanted to know more about how a biologist looked at things. And the University of California was very kind to me, both the zoology departments and the animal behavior group in psychology. And I spent a fair amount of time there auditing classes and talking to people and developing a sense of what a hormone is and how biologists look at biology, which is much broader than a biomedical model. That's just one piece of it. Then I came back and finished my training and did various other things. I eventually got back into bodywork, interestingly, during my own perimenopausal years when my highly intellectual side, I think, wanted some balance with my more intuitive and interactional side. And shiatsu provided a way for me to express this in a way that was a lot of fun and interesting and helpful to people. So that worked out well. I stumbled into menopause research when a colleague asked me to collaborate with her on a professional paper that was just about health psychology, that was just looking at what did we know about various aspects of the menstrual cycle. And she asked me to do the menopause part of it. So I dived into the literature, and I actually found it extremely interesting and have spent more than 25 years pursuing it ever since. What struck me from the beginning was how little we really knew, how little research there really was, and how strong the opinions were that people held, even so, about what menopause is and what its symptoms are and why we have it and all of this other stuff. And I became really interested in how do professionals decide what they believe? If professionals are looking at the same research, how is it they arrive at such different conclusions? And we see that even today. I mean, certainly in the States, which is mostly what I know about, if a woman goes on a website to get information about menopause, one website will have menopause listed as a medical condition, and another one won't. One website will say that at menopause, a woman's risk of heart disease skyrockets, and another one won't even mention heart disease. And a third will say risk factors increase slightly. So how are people looking at sometimes we think of science as giving us the facts, but people's basic, what I was doing research on was how do people decide how to make sense of what the research is saying? And that has to do with their underlying values, their underlying sense of what science is, and a bunch of other things. And, that's more about what I'll be talking about. From there, I started to look at, well, how else could you look at menopause other than this traditional biomedical model? In the biomedical model, it's a very common sense idea that as we get older, parts wear out. So, we get gray, we sag, our hearts start malfunctioning, and menopause is another example of that. And if you think of it as a part wearing out and not working, then you're naturally going to be paying a lot of attention to what kind of problems is this causing. Whereas if you start from another position, you might end up asking different questions. And if you start out from that position of, gee, this is, aging meaning what's called senescence or deterioration. That's what aging is. It's deterioration. And you add to that the idea that for a woman, her reproductive physiology is not only crucial, but having the reproductive physiology of a young woman is what's normal. Then you're again looking for, so what do these changing amounts of estrogen in particular mean? And what's worrisome about it, And if you add to that the idea that most animals reproduce their whole lives, humans don't. We stop about halfway through our lifespan. So what's that all about? And if you think of that as well, there's something weird about that. Why are women living so long? That kind of contributes to that worldview. If you look at biology from a broader perspective, there's a lot of research that's done mostly by anthropologists and biologists who are not biomedical people that look at different kinds of information about menopause. And I guess I'll just jump ahead into this, Suzanne.
Yeah, no, this is really why I got you to come and talk, because I think that so many people, there is so much confusing information. And we're, in a way, what I wanted to do in this conversation with you is really go back to how do we see it and ask some of these fundamental questions, like the one about that you said, how professionals decide. Why do people decide from the same research paper and draw completely different conclusions? And then also the whole looking at the biomedical model and its limitations. And I love the way that you talk about it. It's really all about our perspective, what we're choosing to focus on and how we form our view. And so now you've given us a nice background to launch into, how do you see the menopause?
Yeah, okay. And again, I'm going to talk like either or, biomedical versus non-biomedical, but reality is usually, you make these extremes to make what you're saying clear, but reality is usually a mishmash of the two. And the biomedical model is certainly helpful and useful for certain people under certain conditions. So so this is just to add to it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I really like about, and we're and looking at it in a different way that isn't often talked about. So great, I'm enjoying it already.
Okay, so what some of these other researchers point out is that menopause is this real weird thing in nature. It's only humans and maybe one or other species that have a menopause. And sometimes some researchers will say, well, look, monkeys and apes have similar physiology to us and stop reproducing, also. So no, but it's actually only humans that have menopause about halfway through the lifespan. Humans could live up to about 100, 110, something like that. And if we stop, probably you don't get 80-year-old women menstruating or 70-year-old women. It's a phenomenon of midlife, not old age. And it's universal. And you don't find that anywhere else, that it's universal. And you don't find it halfway through the lifespan, so that there's this huge period of time afterwards. And in humans, what's in our ovary are these things called follicles, which is an immature egg surrounded by a ball of cells that kind of self-destruct throughout our lifespan. And it seems to be only humans that run out of follicles. Whereas in other species, you can find at least some individuals who ovulate within a year or two of what's known to be the end of the possible life cycle of that species. So here you have something that's universal, that's almost unique to humans. So why are you saying that it's senescence? Why are you saying it's abnormal? Doesn't it seem to be part of the developmental set of stages that humans have?
Yes, I like that. It's part of our whole, it's a normal part of our life cycle, you're saying. It's not, because it's only halfway through our life, it seems a bit odd to see it as aging and things wearing out, because we're only halfway through, potentially, like you say. So it's in a way you're saying it's one of our normal life phases. We've still got plenty of life left. And maybe you could talk more about that.
Yeah. And again, I mean, that's not an absolute fact, but I think it's plausible. I mean, I think it makes sense. I think it makes more sense than limiting it to senescence and nothing else. And the other thing that's true is that most of in fact, our other systems, our hearts and our bones and our brains, diseases really are getting common once you're about 70, 80, something like that. Only the reproductive system is starting to not only wear out, but stop working altogether. The heart doesn't stop working altogether until we die. So this is 20 years before anything else, which also seems a little bit weird if it's senescence. Now, people are divided in the anthropology. Some of them say, well, it is senescence and maybe humans just evolved to have a long life cycle. But that doesn't mean that it has all these other meanings. It could just be that we are not reproducing anymore without it meaning that it's causing a lot of health problems, that the two can be separated if that's what's going on. And then the other point of view is that one of the reasons that we run out of follicles, which is what creates the absolute inability to have periods, because the follicles have the eggs in them and are manufacturing hormones, is that rate of follicle destruction starts accelerating somewhere around age 35. If it didn't, we would run out of follicles about age 70, which is when everything else is winding down. So there's something striking about that also, and that's the other perspective on it in terms of it's actually, actively selected for rather than a happy accident of having a longer lifespan and then nature making use of that.
Mm. And also, I would say, I mean, when you say it's interesting that you present this view of the reproductive organs not working. The way that I'd see it is they're changing it. Only one aspect of them, in a way, isn't working, and that's the capacity to produce an egg which is capable of fertilization. And then, because a woman's body also needs to then be supporting that egg for 9 months. And it's kind of, for me, how I see it is it's that aspect of our reproductive organs. I actually quite like to use the Chinese word, which is halases, because they're reproductive organs, but they're also sexual organs. And so the aspect of expressing our sexuality isn't running out. Indeed, I know many women who have their most fulfilling sex lives after the menopause. And so for me, it's more like a shift in the nature of what's going on in our so-called reproductive organs, but seeing them in a wider than the part that's for reproduction stops in women, but they're still there as functioning organs. I don't know if you want to say something more about.
I agree with you about that, absolutely, that the outer part of the ovary has the eggs and the follicles. The inner part is still making hormones after menopause. It's not making estrogen, it's making, you get a precursor to estrogen, and an enzyme comes and chops a piece off, and that's estrogen, that's what's left. And that the precursor hormones are still being made. The enzymes that chop them off so you get estrogen are still being made. And there are two kinds of estrogen in the body. Estradiol is almost gone, but the other one, estrone, is in the low normal range. So there actually is still estrogen in the body, which is being manufactured outside of the ovary. So I absolutely agree with you that it's still a functioning organ in that sense. Yeah.
And the whole sexual expression, but like you say, in terms of the hormones, our body's shifting to making different types of estrogens, and if that's what the body is doing naturally, then there must be a reason for that.
Yeah, whatever it is that estrogen does, it's not clear how much you need when you don't need massive amounts to support a pregnancy.
And that's the key, isn't it? Because that's what I like about these charts that look at our levels of estrogen and progesterone before puberty, and they're quite low at that stage of our life. And nobody talks about pre-puberty as our reproductive organs are running out, because clearly they're not. We're in our youth. And so in a way, it's almost, I know it's very different as well what happens, but when we just look at estrogen and progesterone levels, like you say, they're high for that phase of our life when our body is ready to support a fertilized egg. But when our body isn't going to be supporting a fertilized egg, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about why. I mean, to me, it makes sense that as we get older, we don't have enough energy within our body to also support a pregnancy. And it's not just the 9 months of pregnancy, it's looking after a young child, and potentially, traditionally, breastfeeding, which many women would do for several years as well. So pregnancy, or that reproductive part of our body, it can't carry on working in that sense, because it would be too demanding on our body, which is, as you say, is aging. So for me, I see it as a natural shift so that we have more energy available for supporting our heart and our bones and the rest of our body and our sexuality.
Yeah. I mean, and again, in here, I absolutely agree with you about the young girls. I mean, nobody talks about young girls having cognitive problems because they don't have enough estrogen in their brains.
Yeah, exactly.
And so forth and so on. So yeah, I agree with you about that. But I think one place we may differ is I put a lot of emphasis on the social as well. I mean, women who have their ovaries removed, who really don't have estrogen, still are sexual. That what's true about humans compared to, let's say, a rat, is that there are so many more pathways to get anywhere you want to go. And for humans, social stuff is important in sexuality in a way that it isn't in a rat.
Yes. Yeah.
A rat has to have estrogen. We don't, and I think that I think we're on the same place in this, but we come at it in different ways. That I think in human groups that, well, humans have life stages that are different from any other animal. I mean, adolescence and childhood. So if there's a life stage called, midlife or mature adulthood or whatever you want to call it, there's nothing unusual about humans having an unusual life stage. And what anthropologists say is human life stages get stretched out. So there's nothing unusual about a woman of 50 and 60 still being, starting to slow down, but still not being really decrepit. but in human groups also, the women are important for child rearing, but they're also, I mean, they're gathering food, they're doing all kinds of things. And in human groups that adapt through having an organized group structure and a culture, that's how we adapt, the shared culture and the symbolic function, that you need ways of organizing that. And before you had, constitutions and the internet, you had older people playing important roles in creating and maintaining social order. So there were all kinds of leadership positions for older women, and people who have studied hunter-gatherers have talked about the fact that you find postmenopausal women, and one thing that's kind of really well known is the grandmother hypothesis, that, if you're not taking care of your own kids, you're helping with younger kids. So, if a woman has a toddler and a newborn and somebody's helping with the toddler, that toddler is more likely to flourish. And that helped humans spread out into a whole lot of different environments where food was hard to come by. But in addition, what's also found in these hunter-gatherer groups are that these midlife women are social leaders. They assign tasks. They tell people who they can marry. So there's just a whole bunch of leadership roles in addition to giving birth to a kid, that go into a child being in an environment where they can flourish and live long enough to have kids themselves. You have to not only raise your own kid, the kid has to become a functioning member of a social group that's able to survive. So another view is that another advantage for humans in having midlife women isn't, in addition to the sexuality and maintaining their own sexuality, is the leadership roles they can play in social groups of all sorts, spiritual as well as functional. So,
yeah,
anyway.
I think that you're right. That is an important aspect to address, that it's only relatively recently that older women haven't had so much of a role. And I think now older women are beginning to take back some of that, the role. But for most of human history, as you say, older women were an important part of society. To my understanding as well, because a lot of my early career I worked with pregnancy, many of the midwives were often either childless women or older women who didn't have their own young children to look after, and they could be available also for supporting other women, not only in child rearing, as you said, and not only in educating, younger and older children, but also being able to support the younger women during their birthing processes.
Yeah. So if you start from that point, it's like it leads to a different perspective. Like I forget the guy's name. He wrote a paper about this, that if women were relied on by members of their society to have leadership roles, you don't expect women to become demented after menopause. I mean, they might be, but it doesn't seem as burning a question if in fact they're playing this crucial social role. It doesn't seem as natural a question to ask. And there's a whole bunch of other issues like that that become looked at very differently when you have that kind of a perspective.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I think I really like that phrase you said about if women are in their second half of their life going to take on important leadership roles or other kind of roles that are important for society, then it doesn't seem that their brain is going to be functioning, but in a different kind of way. And it also makes me think the whole emphasis now in modern societies that women want to have their career first before having children. It seems in more traditional societies, I imagine, you can tell me more about this, but from my understanding is that women would have children younger when the quality of their eggs was stronger, they had younger bodies, they could look after their, they weren't so old when they had children, and then they'd have, in a way, their career or their more societal role after having children rather than before having children. So it's like you say, a lot of this is about perspectives and expectations.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what you're saying is interesting. I don't know for a fact, but it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I love that you're bringing in this perspective, because it is about looking at things from other perspective and what makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one other thing I want to say is that, like when Margaret Lock, this anthropologist, studied menopause in Japan, what she found was that there was one word for period stopping, and there was another word for a life transition in which period stopping was only a small part. And that's true of any life stage. I mean, for puberty, hormonal changes of all sorts are really important, but people cognitively change, they develop different social roles. I mean, a life stage includes hormones as an important part, and it's more holistic. So if menopause is part of a midlife shift, what I like to think about is that it's a shift towards, and this sort of echoes things that you've said a lot, Suzanne. It's a shift towards a more centered sense of self. And I guess what I would also emphasize in that is it's a shift towards a greater awareness of the social environment, one's own self, and how the two differ. Because if you're moving into a leadership role, that's what you need for a leadership role. And what some psychologists do say about midlife is it is a time of bringing the internal and the external into better balance, what's called a life structure. And in that sense, what I see in a lot of women during the perimenopause is this: first of all, if it's true that it's that there's a cognitive development towards a more centered sense of self, transitions by their nature include a middle part where you're in between. So there's going to be a time when you're more vulnerable, when things are more confusing, and if you're busy and you don't have time for that, or you don't want to deal with it, it's going to be increasingly problematical. And if during a shift you need more support and you can't get it, that's also going to be more problematical. And again, what I see also is with me coming back to body work, you see a lot of women who, they're in a marriage for 20 years and all of a sudden they say, I can't take this anymore, because they don't want to accommodate. They want congruence between what's going on out there and what's going on in their internal world. Or somebody sort of trained as an artist, but took a practical job, in industry, which uses her artwork, but isn't really what she wants to do. And then during her 40s says, I really want to go back to being an artist, goes back to graduate school, and again, wants to express all those parts and integrate them and have greater congruence between what's going on in here and and have a life structure or a world around them that makes sense. So I think that at least some psychological issues, not all, during perimenopause can involve not simply a hormonal imbalance. And if it does, the way my personal bias is to think of that as a complication of menopause or perimenopause, that again, we want to ask, if you want to ask the question, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but if you want to ask the question, okay, a lot of women in our culture have a hard time during menopause. Well, that's not always true. In other cultures, it's less true. So why is it true? I think one important thing is to pay attention to that, but another important thing is to understand or ask the question, this isn't simply this biological process emerging, it's this biological process emerging when it isn't supported or other things are not happening that are driving it to be more problematical, that it would be worthwhile to understand, in addition to undoubtedly for some people, it really is just, a purely physiological hormonal imbalance, but not for everyone.
I mean, I agree with you in my work, and also, in my experience of women going through the menopause. It does, firstly, support is really crucial. And that's what I think both you and I, in terms of shiatsu can be a really powerful support. Bodywork helps our body to change, not just in terms of any physical symptoms, but in terms, especially shiatsu and Chinese medicine, it's a lot about our emotions and how we are adapting to a change in our social life, in our internal and external realities. We're recalibrating. And if we have been, and I have noticed this with people who have kind of put up with things for many years, that relationships or work, like the examples that you gave, it's often during the transition, the perimenopause, that they realize they can't take it anymore. And those women that do have the courage to step out of their current reality and make quite fundamental changes navigate it much better than people that are putting up with it. Or I sometimes also feel perhaps the hormonal treatment could even mask some of that. I mean, rather than, like you say, I think we should be asking the questions, why do some women find it such a difficult time? And I agree with you. I think it's because their internal and external realities are no longer congruent. It's a time when things come up to be processed. And if we avoid them, then our body lets us know that the body doesn't just put up with things. It will express itself in a physical way. I mean, as you say, that's not the only reason. There can be purely physiological things that are going on, but in terms of this emotional or identity transition, then it's really important to see that as part of what is going on, that it is a time that for some women, they need to make quite big changes in their lives. And if they do that, then their life carries on and they've made the changes. And if they don't, they're much more likely to suffer physically or emotionally.
Yeah, I agree with that. And can I just say a few more things about shiatsu?
Oh yes, that would be great. It'd be lovely.
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I'm talking to you, but I don't really know whether what I do is what everybody does or not. But what I think is that the first thing is always, I mean, the way I feel comfortable is that the first thing is getting comfortable, is getting a sense of safety and a sense of somewhere to come back to. And sometimes women are just stressed because they're doing too much. And sometimes they have a sense of a lack of safety when things are coming up. And for me, that's what has to happen first. So like I might tell somebody to, okay, you have all these things to worry about, and that's real. They really are there, but build vacation time into your day. Take 5 minutes when, even though all of that is true, that you can take 5 minutes to just do something pleasant or think something pleasant, to kind of develop that rhythm, but get back into that rhythm instead of getting stuck in one thing or another, and to begin to develop that sense of internal centering or safety. And there are any number of other ways of doing that as well on your own. I mean, many practices that you can use. And then when stuff comes up, you're looking at it with curiosity. You're not just getting immersed in it. So this and to me, it's like if something comes up and you don't really want to deal with it, there's nothing wrong with saying I'm going to put this away and bring it back out another time when I can see it from a mindful perspective, because that's when you can really express it and integrate it. In terms of shiatsu, I mean, I'm just learning your EV stuff, and it's real. I really want to learn more. It's very powerful. What I do now is I usually do a little governing vessel work at the beginning of a session just to get things moving. And then for people who are at that, centering stage, some of them, the issue is grounding. So grounding exercises are great, and working with earth meridians are great. For people who are emotionally vulnerable or have a trauma history, supplemental fire will often show up as an issue. And there it's eventually you want to have a boundary that's flexible. I can close my boundaries when I want, I can open them when I, open up to other people when I want. But to start with, you've got to be able to shut them down before you develop a flexible ones. And again, for other people, the issue is more just the basic boundary, and that tends to be more metal. So for people like that, just saying no can be an important thing. Going into their bodies and finding somewhere pleasant can be an important thing. And then when people are ready to process, what I find is that fire and wood come up, is really what I'm focusing on more.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, I agree with you about the safety aspect as being the most important. And what people find helps them feel safe is different for each person, isn't it? I mean, often it can be, like you say, grounding. And so that is a lot in China. I'm going to add a few things in because maybe not all of the people listening know Chinese medicine that well. So I'm just going to add a few things in. So grounding is like seeing us, the lower part of our body is more connected to the earth. And you said about earth meridians and connecting to the earth. And that in Chinese medicine, that's often a lot the stomach and the spleen and the earth, but also the yin parts of the body. It's our feet and our legs and supporting stability, grounding, sometimes very simple things like just walking on the earth or just being aware of that part of our body. So that can be one way that people can feel safe. You also talked about finding the rhythms, and in Chinese medicine, that again, that's a lot the rhythms we see in Chinese medicine. Our inner body is a reflection of the outer rhythms of the world. So the earth herself is what gives rhythms and can help support with the grounding. You also talked about GV, that's governing vessel. For those who don't know what governing vessel is, it's the center, and you talked about centering. A way of centering is to work with the midline of the body, the vertical midline. And governing vessel is really all the back of the body, starting at the perineum. It's through our whole spine, and it actually goes through the top of our head. So those who work with yoga, the crown chakra and our third eye, and it ends at our mouth. And that we have the front line is the conception vessel, and that's the yin, and that's also a way that we can feel safe. And then the governing vessel is the back, and it's about balancing yin and yang. And then also just to say to people, EVs, there's some special vessels that I work with that I've made lots of videos on, which are the extraordinary vessels. And actually governing vessel and conception vessel are the origin of all of the extraordinary vessels. You also talked about fire. Supplemental fire is the outer layer of the fire, and we talk about the heart protector meridian, which is the inside of the arms, and it's about how it's its name. It's how we protect our heart, how we open up our heart to others. That can be a boundary. You said when people are working through things, it's often about their fire, and heart protector are both connected to the fire element, and the heart is our shen, and it's a lot about our capacity to relate to other people, but it's also a lot about why we're here and how we express our basic soul purpose in life. And wood is movement and dynamism, and it's the aspect of us that's a bit like a tree, wood energy, and our capacity to both be grounded and connected to the earth, but expansive and connected to space and allowing change. It's a lot the energy of spring, which is now, and spring and wood energy, and a change, the transition from the coldest time of year to the warmest time of year. Wood is a very powerful energy of transformation and can help us move through basic processes in our life. If you want to add anything else to that you feel.
No, thank you. No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, so do you want to say anything more about how you work specifically with clients in the menopause, or kind of themes that you find come up a lot?
I think that unless you want me to speak more, I think I feel that's just kind of a nice general orientation towards the transformative perspective on it.
Mm. And have you found that with shiatsu, it has helped the women that you've worked with go through the menopause?
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, there's that old saying in Chinese medicine that people leave saying, I feel more like myself.
Mm. Yes.
You know, so that's, and people actually seeing changes in their lives, able to move forward with making these changes that they've been contemplating.
Mm. It's like you say, I mean, you were talking about this before, about how often women are very caught up in the moment and they can't take that space, and how it's important to set things aside. And shiatsu offers that space, doesn't it, where people can set things aside and have a bit of space to come back to themselves, and then by taking that time out, they can begin to start making changes in their life.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Is there anything more that you'd like to say about the menopause? Does that
I don't think
feel?
so.
Yeah, it feels quite clear. I think we covered quite a lot of different things within that. Seeing it as a life stage, you mentioned lots of different things that I like. I like your perspective on it, and I think it's a perspective that isn't heard very often. And I also like that you say, but this is maybe not correct, because we're always evolving our understanding, aren't we? And I think that's one of the things that I get a little bit upset about when people say, well, this is what's going on and this is how it is. It's clearly a very complex stage of our lives. There are many different views on how it is, and it's good to be open to, there are truths, as you said to me before we started this conversation, that I recorded it, that the biomedical model does offer us things. And as shiatsu practitioners, as people working with different models, we are also informed by the biomedical model. We don't reject everything. And you've been very informed by biology, by anthropology, and there are different perspectives, and there's not one way. Life is multi-layered and complex. And we're all
Messy.
messy. Yes. Do you want to have a final thoughts on our conversation, or a final message that you want to share with women who are going through the menopause or who have gone beyond?
I guess the only message I would share is that people have very different experiences, and that all of this information can be a useful guidepost, but that at the end of the day, I think it's good to just use it to help get in touch with with your own reality. to kind of come, and I think it's good to have information so you don't feel, I don't know what's going on. But again, it's a guidepost, and ultimately it's just a tool for you to use to get back into your own experience and make sense of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really nice ending, to get back into your own experience and to make sense of it, because we are also all unique, and what works for one person, not everybody is always going to benefit from shiatsu, and some women do clearly benefit from hormone replacement therapy, and we're not here to, I don't see myself as here to judge what other people do, that we each need to make the choices that feel right for us. So thank you very much, Paula. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I feel enriched by the different perspectives that you have. And if people do have questions, please put them in the chat below this video, and I'll pass them on to Paula and she can respond.
Okay, and I should just say people are also welcome to email me if they have any questions, which is simply my name @gmail. So
okay, I'll put some contacts for Paula in the text below this video. So I'll put Paula's email, and she's got a website. She's got lots of articles, really interesting articles on her website, where she also quotes many of the research papers. I'll get that when you mentioned someone, a research paper by somebody. I'll put that also. If you could dig out the reference, I'll put that below. And actually, there was one last question I wanted to ask you. The woman, Margaret Lock, who did research in Japan, because shiatsu was developed in Japan, about the two different words, the period stopping and the life transition. That would be quite an interesting thing. So we'll put more information below for you. Paula's just making a note now. And we both look forward to continuing this conversation, because it is a continuing conversation. We don't propose that we have all the answers. We're just hoping to give you some different tools and ideas for your own personal research. So thank you so much, Paula, for your time today.
okay, and thank you for having me.